It has come to my attention through decades of exploring the human psyche that many individuals feel as if they are a piece on a chessboard unaware of the game being played. Picture this. You are engaged in what seems a normal conversation. The person across from you speaks with a gentle tone, perhaps even a caring smile, but something feels off. Your gut whispers warnings while your mind scrambles to make sense of the interaction, and then it hits you. You have been psychologically manipulated and you walk directly into the trap. But what may shock you more is my discovery that these are not random tactics. They are ancient patterns, what I have termed archetypal shadows, dark psychological mechanisms that certain individuals use to invade your mental space and bend your reality to their will. Stay with me, for what I am about to reveal could spare you years of self-doubt and psychological torment. I have said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But what I did not often share publicly was this. Manipulators use this very principle against you, turning your self-awareness into a weapon pointed at your own mind. In the next few minutes, I will expose the 5 most dangerous psychological questions that I have identified as tools of mental manipulation. More importantly, I will show you the techniques to not only recognize them, but to turn the tables entirely. By the end of this, you will possess what I call conscious realization, the ability to see through any psychological game before it even begins. I must warn you, however, once you learn these patterns, you will start seeing them everywhere in friends, family, colleagues, even strangers. You will notice when they attempt to access your psychological backdoors. Some find this knowledge disturbing. Are you ready to see the matrix of manipulation? Let us dive deep into the shadow. Question 1. Why are you being so sensitive? Before I elucidate this first manipulation, let me ask you something that may cause discomfort. How many times have you been told you were too sensitive immediately after you pointed out something that felt wrong? If a specific moment comes to mind, you have already experienced what I call shadow projection. Here is what most people do not realize. Manipulators instinctively use what I have termed psychological invalidation. They do not attack your argument. They attack your very right to have feelings about it. According to my research on the human psyche, sensitivity is not a weakness. It is your unconscious mind detecting incongruence. I wrote, your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakens? But here is the twisted part. Manipulators know that sensitive people are often the most perceptive. They can sense lies, feel tension, and notice micro-expressions that others miss. So instead of hiding their intentions better, manipulators have learned to weaponize your gift against you. Think about this for a moment. The financial analyst who spots irregularities in the books is called paranoid until she uncovers a massive fraud. The wife who senses her husband's behavioral changes is dismissed as insecure until she discovers the affair. The employee who questions unethical practices is labeled difficult until the scandal breaks. I call this the persecution of the perceptive. In my analytical psychology, when someone attacks your sensitivity, they are truly saying, stop using your psychological radar. It is detecting things I do not want exposed. But here is where it becomes truly interesting. I discovered a counterattack that completely disarms this manipulation. I call it the conscious assertion of shadow integration. The next time someone asks, why are you being so sensitive? Do not defend, explain, or apologize. Look them in the eyes and calmly say, I am not being sensitive. I am being perceptive. Does that make you uncomfortable? Watch what happens next. I predicted that manipulators will do one of 3 things. They will become angry, revealing their true nature. They will deflect to another topic, confirming your suspicion. Or they will suddenly become overly nice, a desperate attempt at damage control. But we are just beginning. The next question is even more insidious. Question 2. Do you trust me? Stop everything and listen closely. I made a discovery that changed psychology forever. I found that genuine trust operates in the unconscious mind while demanded trust operates in the ego. And here is the crucial point. People who demand trust are usually the least trustworthy. I have said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But what I observed in my clinical work was this. Manipulators do not want transformation. They want domination. The phrase "you trust me, right?" is what I call a psychological ultimatum disguised as intimacy. Here is what is truly happening in your psyche when someone says this. According to my research on psychological complexes, this question triggers what I term the loyalty conflict complex. Your conscious mind wants to be a good person who trusts others, but your unconscious mind is screaming warnings. This internal war is precisely what the manipulator counts on. I discovered that trustworthy people never need to ask for trust because they demonstrate it through what I call consistent psychological congruence. Their words, actions, and energy all align. But manipulators learn to hack this system. Consider the business partner who will not show you the financial records, but leans in and says, "You trust me, right?" Or the romantic partner who hides their phone, but gets offended, demanding, "Don't you trust me?" I call this trust as a weapon. In my depth psychology, this question is designed to shut down your analytical mind and activate your guilt complex. It is not about building trust. It is about bypassing your psychological defenses. Here is the response that will expose them instantly. When someone asks, "You trust me, right?" Pause, breathe, and apply what I call conscious detachment. Look at them calmly and say, "Trust is earned through consistency, not through questions." Are you asking me to ignore my intuition? I predicted that a trustworthy person will respect this boundary and continue proving themselves through actions. A manipulator, however, will either become defensive, change the subject, or try to make you feel guilty for having standards. But hold on. The third question is where things become truly dark. Question 3. Are you accusing me of something? Before I reveal this psychological weapon, I must warn you about a disturbing discovery. I found that master manipulators do not merely lie. They reshape reality itself. This question is what I call the reversal technique. Turning the investigator into the investigated. Here is how your mind is hijacked. According to my research on psychological projection, when you notice something suspicious and ask a reasonable question, the manipulator immediately flips the script. Suddenly you are the problem. You are the one causing trouble. You are the one who needs to explain yourself. I wrote projection is one of the commonest psychic phenomena. Everything that is unconscious in ourselves we discover in our neighbor and we treat him accordingly. But manipulators weaponize this natural tendency. They project their guilt onto you and then attack you for carrying it. It is psychological warfare disguised as self-defense. Let me illustrate how this works. You notice financial discrepancies at work and ask your boss a simple question. Their immediate response is, "Wait, are you accusing me of something?" Now you are backpedaling, explaining yourself, apologizing for being observant. I call this the guilt transfer complex. In my analytical psychology, this question is designed to trigger what I term the responsibility reversal. Instead of them explaining suspicious behavior, you are now explaining your right to notice it. But here is what I discovered. That changes everything. The power lies not in the question, but in the silence that follows. I observed that manipulators expect immediate panic, quick explanations, and desperate apologies. They never expect composed confidence. The counterattack is devastatingly simple. When someone snaps, "Are you accusing me of something?" Do not rush to fill the silence. Apply what I call the therapeutic pause. Hold eye contact. Wait 2 to 3 seconds, then calmly respond. Should I be just 3 words? But those 3 words contain what I call conscious power. Because innocent people do not fear questions. Only guilty people do. Your composed response forces them to confront their own shadow instead of hiding behind yours. But we are not done yet. The 4th question is pure psychological poison. Question 4. Would I ever lie to you? What I am about to tell you may change how you see every relationship in your life. I discovered something most people never realize. The question, "Would I ever lie to you?" is actually a lie itself. Not because of the words, but because of the intention behind them. Here is the psychological trap. According to my research on what I called persona manipulation, this question is not seeking an answer. It is creating an emotional debt. The manipulator makes you feel guilty for doubting them even when your intuition screams warnings. I wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But manipulators try to make you feel like a horrible person for being observant, intuitive, and cautious for being yourself. And here is the truly twisted part. I found that people who need to ask this question are often revealing their own psychological state. I call it unconscious confession through overcompensation. Think about this pattern. The spouse who hides their phone but becomes tearful asking, "Would I ever lie to you?" The business partner who will not show you the books but seems wounded saying, "Come on, would I really deceive you?" I call this a performance of innocence. In my depth psychology, genuine honesty does not perform. It simply exists. Honest people do not need to convince you they are incapable of lying. Their actions create what I call unconscious trust. You feel safe without them having to tell you why. But manipulators have learned to counterfeit this feeling. They use emotional theater to bypass your logical mind and activate your guilt. Complex, the tears, the wounded tone, the implied accusation that you are heartless for doubting them. It is all designed to make you stop thinking and start feeling sorry. Here is the technique that exposes this immediately. When someone asks, "Would I ever lie to you?" do not take the bait. Apply what I call conscious questioning. Pause and then respond. That is not the right question. The question is, "Would I know if you did?" This single response flips the entire psychological frame because liars thrive in emotional fog but they wither under the spotlight of conscious awareness. Your response switches on what I call the light of consciousness and suddenly the shadows have nowhere to hide. But the final question is the most dangerous of all. Question 5. Can we just move on? What I am about to reveal may be the most important psychological insight you ever learn. I discovered that this innocent-sounding question is actually the manipulator's nuclear option. When denial, distraction, and guilt fail, they deploy what I call forced forgetting, the demand that you abandon truth for the illusion of peace. But here is what I understood that most people do not. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Real resolution requires facing uncomfortable truths. Manipulators want to skip the pain and jump straight to your forgiveness. According to my research on psychological healing, moving on without understanding is like placing a bandage over an infected wound. It looks better on the surface, but the poison continues to spread underneath. Consider how this plays out. The company caught in a scandal begs employees, "Let's not dwell on the past. Let's focus on the future." The unfaithful partner who has been exposed pleads, "Why keep talking about it? We need to move forward." But I discovered something crucial. These are not requests for healing. They are demands for amnesia. The manipulator does not want to resolve the issue. They want to erase it from your consciousness. I call this psychological burial. In my analytical psychology, true healing happens when the unconscious becomes conscious. But manipulators want to push everything back into the unconscious where it cannot threaten their control. Here is the pattern I identified. First, they deny there is a problem. Then they minimize it. Then they blame you for creating it. And finally, when none of that works, they exhaust you into abandoning the search for truth. But I discovered the antidote. When someone asks, "Can't we just move on?" Apply what I call conscious anchoring. Take a breath and respond, "I will move on when I understand what happened, not before." This single sentence tells them that your peace is built on clarity, not confusion. That you cannot be rushed, pressured, or exhausted into abandoning truth. I wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That is precisely what manipulators count on. That you will give up, grow tired, and let unconscious patterns control your life. But not anymore. Now that you know the 5 weapons, let me give you the ultimate defense. I discovered that manipulators have one fatal weakness. They need your emotional reaction to survive. Take that away, and their entire system collapses. I call this conscious detachment, the ability to observe without being consumed. According to my research on what I termed individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole, the manipulator's greatest fear is encountering someone who cannot be destabilized. Here is what I taught my patients. When you remain calm while others lose control. When you stay clear while others create confusion. When you hold steady while others try to shake your reality, you become what I call psychologically sovereign. And sovereignty cannot be manipulated. I wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." But manipulators want you to become what they need you to be. Confused, guilty, exhausted, and compliant. Before responding to any manipulative question, ask yourself what I call the consciousness question. Is this reaction coming from my authentic self or from a complex they are trying to activate? Because here is what I discovered. Manipulators do not attack your true self. They attack the psychological complexes, the wounded parts, the insecure aspects. They try to trigger your not good enough complex, your guilt complex, your need to be liked complex. But when you operate from what I call the centered self, you become untouchable. Let me give you my ultimate technique. When facing any of these manipulative questions, take what I call the conscious pause. Breathe. Feel your feet on the ground. Connect with your authentic self. Then respond not from your complex but from your center. This is what I meant when I wrote, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." The manipulator wants to keep you dreaming, lost in their projected reality. But consciousness is the great awakener. And once you are awake, you can never be controlled again. Here is something that may surprise you. I believe that every encounter with manipulation is actually a gift in disguise. I call it shadow work. The process of becoming stronger through understanding darkness. I said one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light but by making the darkness conscious. Every manipulator who tries to control you is showing you where you need to build stronger psychological boundaries. Every lie they tell helps you develop better truth detection. Every game they play teaches you to recognize the next one faster. According to my research on psychological development, the people who try to manipulate you are unconsciously serving your growth. They force you to develop what I call conscious discrimination. The ability to instantly tell truth from deception, authentic connection from manipulation, genuine care from control. And once you develop this ability, you become dangerous to manipulators everywhere. Not because you fight them, but because you see them. And I discovered that being truly seen is the manipulator's greatest fear. Because manipulators are shadow dwellers. They can only operate in psychological darkness. When you shine the light of consciousness on their tactics, they lose all power. They are like vampires in sunlight. They cannot survive in the presence of aware, centered, psychologically sovereign individuals. This is why I call conscious people the great threat to unconscious manipulation. This is your psychological liberation. Are you ready for the truth that will set you free? I spent my entire career studying one fundamental question. How do humans become psychologically free? And what I discovered was this. Freedom is not the absence of challenge. It is consciousness in the presence of challenge. You now possess what I call the seeing eyes. You can recognize the 5 questions. The sensitivity attack, the trust demand, the accusation reversal, the innocence performance, and the forced forgetting. But more importantly, you understand the psychology behind each one. I wrote, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But I will tell you what is even more terrifying to manipulating someone who has accepted themselves completely. Because when you are not at war with yourself, no one else can recruit you to fight against yourself. When you are not ashamed of your sensitivity, they cannot weaponize it. When you are not desperate for approval, they cannot withhold it for control. When you are not afraid of conflict, they cannot threaten you with abandonment. This is what I call individuation becoming so psychologically integrated that external manipulation becomes impossible. You are no longer a collection of reactive complexes. They can push and pull. You are a conscious individual who responds from choice, not compulsion. And choice is the enemy of manipulation. Here is your homework, your initiation into psychological freedom. For the next week, every time someone tries to manipulate you with emotion, ask yourself my question. What complex in me is this person trying to activate? Then instead of reacting from the complex, pause and respond from your conscious center. Watch how quickly manipulative people either change their behavior around you or simply disappear from your life. Because I discovered something beautiful. When you refuse to play manipulative games, you give everyone around you permission to be authentic, too. Your consciousness does not just free you. It creates space for genuine connection with others. This is the ultimate victory over manipulation. Not just protecting yourself, but creating a field of authenticity that elevates everyone in your presence. You are no longer anyone's psychological victim. You are awake. You are conscious. You are free. And in a world full of shadows, the awakened are the light bringers. My final gift to you is this reminder. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. The manipulators were building barriers between you and authentic connection. But now you can see the barriers, remove them, and step into the genuine relationships that were always waiting on the other side. Choose consciousness. Choose clarity. Choose psychological freedom. Walk as I intended. Awake, aware, and unshakably yourself. The shadow's greatest fear is your light. Turn it on. Keep it on. Never let anyone convince you to dim it.